Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Person-Centred Conversations podcast, which is produced by Person-Centred Practice Community. I'm here with Abbey Brocklehurst, a qualified therapist based in Liverpool. We both met when we were students at Liverpool John Moores University, and today Abbey is going to talk about her experience with her BPD diagnosis.
Hi. So I'm Abbey, and I got diagnosed with borderline personality disorder at the age of 21, and that's also known as emotionally unstable personality disorder, EUPD. I just prefer the term BPD because that's what's on my medical record. And I say it's a misdiagnosis because recently I was diagnosed with autism and ADHD instead.
Right, so that's quite a change from BPD to a whole new diagnosis. So what was important about sharing your journey then with the person-centred community?
Because I just feel like I'm not against psychiatry, but I feel like the psychiatry world lacks that holistic approach in seeing the person as a whole person. And I was just given a BPD label without looking at all the other elements that was going on in my life. And I was very anti-label for quite a while because of the experience I had with the misdiagnosis. So I feel it's just so important for person-centred therapists to just be aware of that, the dangers that can come with labels because the stigma's associated with them and lots of other feelings.
So if you go back to when you were diagnosed, what was your life like at the time?
Quite chaotic. I was 21. I was a mum at 18. So I didn't have quite a typical life at 21. I was in a really toxic relationship. And I don't think at the time, I'd really accepted quite a lot because my first relationships had not really to go off. So I hadn't really discussed this that much in my assessment for BPD. So I think that's why I was diagnosed, because my life was quite chaotic. I was having a lot of ups and down moods, and that's because my relationship was very up and down. And that just led to that diagnosis.
And did you find straight away it was a label that defined you, so it kind of helped you understand who you were, or did you find it was something that made you retreat and kind of, maybe go in on yourself, something maybe you weren't able to have as an identity?
No, I think I did become the label for quite a while. So I felt like when I got it, I was like, right, well, this is what's up with me. I felt like I understood it because it did meet a lot of the characteristics. So I felt like I actually used it as an excuse for quite a lot of poor behaviour as well, things that I wasn't proud of. And I felt like it gave me a sense of understanding, and I joined a lot of community groups, for support groups with BPD, and done group therapy for other people with BPD. And I did feel a sense of belonging to an extent, because I always felt that I wasn't quite the same as other people with the diagnosis. So I just always felt different. But I do feel that, yeah, I went more towards the diagnosis, I lived for it.
And you talked about being part of a community. So at the time, were you aware of any stigma associated to this label, or were you just mixing with other people who had similar diagnoses as yourself, so it didn't feel that strange?
I didn't know what it was when I was diagnosed with it. They just told me, I can remember they gave me a printed NHS leaflet about it, and that was as much as I knew. And I'd bought a book on it, and read that. So this book wasn't very stigmatising. It is if I read it back now, but at the time it wasn't. That was what the research was on BPD. So I didn't really feel a stigma at first. I didn't know any different. I would say my stigma more came from some people who had BPD as well, and just more the outside world.
So that kind of goes back to, even in the community, you said you didn't entirely feel like you fitted, so maybe people who also knew that, they kind of, within your own community, othered you in a way.
Yeah, and there was like at times where like it could be quite competitive as well, like they suffered more, or because BPD is like linked to like a significant trauma, like it's like trauma battles as well. Like some people like, oh well, I went through X, Y, and Z and you never. So that was always a challenge. And then I just always felt different.
And did you find that when you were getting help for the things you were experiencing and the symptoms that you had, was there an immediate focus on medication and kind of pharmacology, or was there any mention of talking therapy or any community groups that you could join?
No, I was put on meds straight away. I was actually medicated before I got the diagnosis. So like just before I got a BPD diagnosis, I was misdiagnosed with bipolar first. Very short-winded, like it's like 6 weeks that they thought I had bipolar. So I was put on an antipsychotic then. Then when I got my BPD diagnosis, I was already on the antipsychotic, so it just made sense for them to keep me on it. And then that got increased and increased and increased. And then it was only when I was at like the maximum dosage that I could have, and there was no medication shown to work for BPD. So this was just like trial and error. So that when it didn't work, then that was when I was offered therapy. And this is back when there was no waiting list as well. So you're talking like 10 years ago.
And, well, you can tell me, but I imagine at that point, you may not have had that aspiration to become a therapist at that stage. And I wonder how different your experience would have been if maybe therapy was offered before medication, now that you know more about therapy.
Yeah. And I didn't want to be a therapist then. Initially, before I had anything, when I was younger, I always wanted to be a psychologist. But even in that moment, I would have thought, I can't because I've got BPD now. And I thought I wouldn't be able to have a job because I had BPD. Like I'd never be able to do anything because I felt such a stigma. No one was stigmatising me at that point, but I was doing it to myself. Because my life was just like so chaotic and up and down.
It goes back to that assumption that some believe, oh, in order to be a therapist, you have to be this perfect, ready-made individual who can put all of their personal difficulties and traumas aside to help others. But I think we now know that that's just not possible.
No, or sustainable either, to try to be a perfect person like that. I think like the way that therapy is misrepresented in the media and like on telly shows and films doesn't help. It's a very well put together person that's always in it. So so that would have contributed. I wouldn't have thought I would have been able to be a therapist.
Yeah. And so when you then embarked on your university course, your master's in particular, studying, a master's degree in person-centred therapy, were you coming into that course thinking that this diagnosis wasn't coming with you, or were you still very much like, well, this is the diagnosis I have, so I just have to get on with it?
So when I'd done my undergraduate before that, I'd been asked a few times if I was neurodivergent. And I always had like, it was more in lockdown, I had like some suspicions that I had ADHD, and I'd done like referrals and waited and it got lost. So before I'd started my masters, I already didn't identify with the BPD that much. So I used to say I have a diagnosis of BPD rather than I have BPD or I am diagnosed. So I'd already separated myself, but still had it enough where I would mention it. Just on the off chance I have got it, it was always worth mentioning. So I was still 50-50 when I was on my masters.
Yeah, and I remember, with us being both in the same cohort, that we did a lesson or a lecture on BPD and how conflicted you felt. From my point of view as your friend, I don't think you were necessarily ashamed or felt, actually, if I remember rightly, you talked about your experience in front of the year group. So it must have been, I mean, that's quite a journey from diagnosis to, well, now I'm going to become a therapist.
Yeah.
Already sharing your life quite publicly.
Well, yeah, it was. And yeah, I did speak quite openly about that I felt I was misdiagnosed. I think that was in the second year. Yeah, second year of uni. So I think like as the time on me masters went on, the more and more it became separated from it. The more clients I worked with, the more separated it became from my diagnosis, because I'd worked with people with BPD and people with neurodivergence as well. So I started becoming more aware of the similarities between the two diagnoses. And yeah, and just like speaking to you as well at uni, that I started to feel I had ADHD. The autism came over shock to me, but I knew I had ADHD. So I think the first thought about becoming a therapist was when I did have therapy. I had a long-term therapist, and it was around then I'd shared with the therapist that I was going to go to uni. It was initially to be a psychologist, because that's what they was. So it was therapy, but they were a qualified psychologist. And then I done my psychology degree, found that was very clinical and didn't like it, and felt that was the world of psychiatry that I didn't really like. And that's when I chose person-centeredness, because I like that viewed the person as a whole.
Yeah, so it wasn't so much that you were fully rejecting it, but you were more considering alternatives or other possibilities, rather than this is the one thing and off you go. You talked a little bit about kind of at the point of diagnosis, you know, you were 21, life was chaotic. So do you think, looking back now, that the environment and the dynamics you were living in, if you had not been in that specific situation, you perhaps would have never have even been diagnosed in the first place? Or how do you now view it?
Yeah, 100%. I can't understand why I wasn't diagnosed with ADHD at 21. Like, thinking back, like, I felt like I just had every exact symptom of what someone with ADHD has. I think because of the environment I was in, it mirrored more BPD, because my environment wasn't the best. And I just felt like I just couldn't grow as a person in that environment. I think if I stayed in that environment all my life, I wouldn't have ever became a therapist. It was only when I'd left my relationship, so I'd left the environment, left the relationship, I then came off my medication, I then didn't identify with having BPD anymore, and then I went to university. So from like ages 17 to 24 was quite like the same environment.
Yeah, and you know, part of the training, well, a big part of person-centered training, is all about understanding environment and the impact it has on behavior, well-being, mental health. And perhaps, had you been in an environment that was much more conducive for you expressing yourself through an ADHD point of view, I wonder if that would have been picked up
I think so. Yeah, I do think so. And I don't blame psychiatry. I'm not anti-psychiatry. I don't blame them. I had the characteristics for a diagnosis, so I can understand it. They just couldn't see my environment, and I wasn't fully open with it. So I know that's a huge factor. But I do think if I was in like the right conditions, if I was given the right conditions, my life would have been very different. I might have became a therapist earlier on. I might have needed that life to become the therapist I am today.
Mm.
So I'm not too sure on it, but I do stand strongly by saying that I couldn't grow as a person if I'd continued to stay in there, because it's not a coincidence that everything got better once I left that environment.
Yeah, and I think if you think about your client work in particular, and I don't know, you may have had clients say to you, I've been diagnosed with this, or I was diagnosed with this, but now it's, it's either still remaining or they've got a new diagnosis. Does that help you connect sometimes with clients who express a similar situation, or do you find that everybody's kind of journey is so individual to them?
No, I do think it helps me connect with them. I've had a lot of clients that don't resonate with a BPD diagnosis, and a lot of clients diagnosed as an adult with neurodivergence, and I do think it helps me connect with clients, me sharing my journey. So I'm always quite open around that I was only diagnosed as an adult, that I also had a misdiagnosis.
And it makes me think about, in therapy, how important certain questions are. And because a question that just came to mind then is, what question could or should have you been asked that would have then allowed you to go down that non-medicated route? Like, what needs do you have? Or do you know what's wrong with you? It'd be interesting if that conversation had happened in a kind of, like a person-centered therapy, or even a person-centered medical perspective.
I think if it'd be more person-centered and asked like how I felt about it, if I resonated with it, like just putting me and my voice back into it, I would have. I don't think I would have went on medication. I just seen it as they were a psychiatrist. They told me what it was. They told me what was the best resolution, and I thought, well, they clearly know best, because
which just highlights not an issue as such, because like you, I'm not anti-psychiatry and I'm not anti-medical models, but now that you are qualified and you work with people who are perhaps in a similar position of you, it's nice to know that there is an alternative. I suppose it's sad that at the time there were no alternatives.
No, and I think that's why I quite like long-term therapy as well, rather than short-term therapy. It's like, if I had only had 8 sessions, even if I'd had a therapy then, if I'd only had 8 sessions, I don't know how much I would have disclosed. But I worked with my therapist at the time for 18 months. And from what I can remember, it was only towards the latter end of the month that like I started to put like pieces of a puzzle back together and started to like really understand the impact of the environment and the life I'd had, and really explored how I'd felt more from like a person-centered, like having my voice and the freedom to speak about that felt very different. Whereas in 8 weeks that would have been impossible. And I feel that pressure in client work as well, the difference of working on a placement in an organisation compared to working in private practice.
Yeah, almost like in private practice, you're not dictating a specific model, or you're not suggesting a golden number of sessions. And maybe with that relationship, it then allows for clients to explore their own situation.
Yeah.
So if you look at the shift from BPD to your now diagnosis of ADHD and autism, what really led you to begin questioning and actually thinking formally, no, I want to see if I do have an alternative diagnosis?
So like I'd already had the separation, hadn't I, from like the diagnosis. I'd said I have a diagnosis rather than I am. And then I don't know, I can remember it was like diagnosis, it was like the beginning of the third year. I'd done, I think it was after talking about BPD. I'd done the talk on BPD, and I ended the talk with saying, I can remember it now, I ended my talk with saying, I don't know if I've got BPD, ADHD or something else, and then listed things I knew about myself. And I thought that was really nice, but then afterwards I was like, I actually don't know. Like, I'd actually sat in and I was like, I actually don't know what I've got. And I'd been so scared of labels for so long that I felt like, well, even if I have got ADHD, it is still a label. So I didn't want to replace one with another. So I just put it off. And then waiting lists as well after COVID was just horrendous. So again, I kept putting it off until, yeah, I think I just felt like it was the right time to discover that. I turned 30, so that was always like a factor in it. And then I'd had many conversations with you at the time as well. I was scared if I went to a ADHD appointment and they said, no, you haven't got it and you have got BPD. I would have been devastated. It would have set me right back.
Yeah, I remember a text from you at the time after you'd gone to both appointments, so that the ADHD and the autism appointments obviously done separately. And I remember you sending a message which was on the lines of, what am I going to do if they say I don't have these labels? Is that a confirmation of BPD, or is it still almost an unanswered journey that you still haven't kind of come to a resolution? And I think I just almost remembered reading it and feeling that this really is a big deal for you, and it's I know how much you didn't want the diagnosis, but not because of any stigma. It was that internal conflict. You just didn't feel, it didn't sit right with you.
Yeah, and it's like in that person-centred feeling, like having like the ideal self and having that conflict between where you see yourself and your previous self. I really struggled with that. Like, it didn't align. And I don't think I was my authentic self without knowing what my identity was. And that was a big part of my identity, was having this label that creeped up in lots of different areas of my life. So I just felt like I couldn't get to that stage of my authentic self without accepting all of it. And I was never accepting of the BPD, so I never felt like I was being authentic because I was always in some shape or form hiding a part of an identity.
Yeah, and again, I've got memories of you calling me and going, I've got my results. And I was like, yeah, what'd they say? And in a way, you were shocked about the autism. You were.
I was, yeah.
But there was also so much compassion kind of for your old self, kind of that whole, you obviously weren't referring to yourself in the third person, but I just felt that sense of, I knew I was X, or whatever version that suddenly clicked for you when you got that diagnosis. And it was almost there was a bit of compassion behind previous you. Almost, it wasn't your fault. You were misled, or
like I grieved a bit. Like, I was really compassionate for my young self, but I grieved at the same time. I think, like, if I'd just been diagnosed earlier, I might have had a different life, like better support and more self-acceptance in certain areas. But the autism one did come as a shock. It took me a lot longer to process that one.
I know you don't have to go into any detail, but is there any specific things where you can now go, right, that makes sense?
Oh yeah, like all of it. Even like reading me report, like when I read my report back of everything that they'd said, like in like PD groups in uni, my feedback was always like how blunt I can be, and I'm quite assertive and straight talking. I was like, oh well, that makes a lot of sense, because I can't sit in the grey area. I will say how I feel. I will say how it is. but because I've got a strong Scouse accent as well, it makes it sound a bit more blunt. So that's like both things going on at the same time. And then just like struggles at school, always feeling like I didn't fit in. And then like with BPD, a lot of it is suicidal ideation. I didn't have that part. So that made a lot of sense. And the crossover with ADHD symptoms and BPD. So it made a lot of sense why I'm a bit more impulsive as the average person. But I'd still probably say I'm just like quite spontaneous. I don't like to put everything down to me ADHD. Like, I want to be able to just, even though I've got a label and I'm happy with the label I've got now, I still like to just think of things as a person. So if I booked a holiday, people say, got ADHD, she's being impulsive. I just want to be spontaneous. And if I'm not doing any harm, it's still okay to do that.
Yeah.
So I can still face, like, I wouldn't go as far as saying it's stigma, but more like, I don't know, assumptions.
Well, as you were talking, what was coming to mind was almost authenticity. So almost being like permission to be 100% Abbey, whether that's ADHD or autism or neither of those. It's just you want to go on holiday.
Yeah, and that's all I do now. I just be me. And I know a lot of parts of me are autism. Like, if I'm very fidgety, I can self-disclose that to a client and say, like, oh, I'm quite fidgety today, and like I might stim. And I self-disclose that I'm neurodivergent anyway. Just mainly because clients, it got to the point where they were asking me if I was neurodivergent, like I didn't know. So it gave me permission to just be me, my whole self, and that's it. Whatever that is.
And do you ever feel there's a vulnerability with sharing with clients, or do you manage it in a way where it just feels that it makes sense? And, you know, and I imagine clients respond positively to it. Otherwise, I can't imagine you self-disclosing if it wasn't working.
Yeah, I feel it does go positively. Especially if they're neurodivergent too, because it's like that sense of belonging that I craved. So I feel it introduces that into the room. And I'm always very careful in, like, you know, just because I'm neurodivergent doesn't mean my reality is the same as their reality, and different diagnosis, like someone diagnosed as a kid can be very different to someone diagnosed as an adult, and someone might mask and I might not. There's lots of different variations. So I'm always very honest in saying that part. But yeah, I find a stronger connection when I'm more open and honest. And especially if it's a misdiagnosis, like if a client's talking about that, I will find it easier to just self-disclose. Like something like, I resonate, I've had a similar experience.
Yeah, so actually it's almost like, again, that authenticity, but also as a therapist.
Yeah, I feel it's for the benefit of the client as well.
Yeah, yeah. And with kind of like a broader reflection, can you, from your experience, can you empathize with, you know, people telling you about their misdiagnosis, and also, you know, why is it's still happening? You know, we have so much more knowledge about neurodiversity, but I know as a therapist myself, I still hear a lot about clients being misdiagnosed.
There's so many misdiagnoses, and I really do, like, my heart totally goes out to them, because I know how horrible it is to still be searching for answers, especially as an adult as well. Like, people over 30, 40, 50 still haven't got answers for what's actually going on inside. And the long waiting lists as well. So there's a panic around that in people trying to find what's going on for them. I don't know if it's the questions that they ask, why people are still misdiagnosed. I think that's why it still happens. But then at the same time, there's that many people who've been misdiagnosed that are now getting correctly diagnosed. I feel that's created the opposite stigma.
Mm-hmm.
So like now, when I say I'm ADHD, people are like, to give them diagnosis out like hotcakes. I've had things like that. So I feel like even just over like recently, the stigma, I'm starting to feel more now for being neurodivergent compared to what I did being BPD.
Yeah, it's a different shift that you weren't anticipating.
Yeah, because like there's a lot of diagnoses going out now and they're all very valid. And it's because there was so many misdiagnoses given out that now it had to be corrected. But because the mass amount, you know, there was no one autistic in my day, things like that. And like, there just wasn't diagnosed.
Especially, females, young females.
Yeah. And, you know, we're all a little bit neurodivergent. No, we're not. And if you feel that way, then you probably are and should maybe go and pursue that. But they're like little things that get said on like social medias and day to day. And there's a lot of misinformation like on TikTok accounts, like 5 signs to know you're ADHD, and it's someone's forgotten about the washing machine. I'm like, I wish that was the biggest thing that went on. Like I didn't forget about my washing machine and think I was neurodivergent. Like there was bigger stuff going on for me. So I feel like that's created a stigma as well, the misdiagnosis and a diagnosis. So I've just became more easier now of just being like, I'm me.
Yeah, and sounds like acceptance.
Yeah.
So what do you hope for people who've listened to your story? What do you want them to take away from this, whether they're person-centred therapists or maybe person-centred therapists in training?
Don't make pre-assumptions based on a diagnosis. Like, just see the person as a whole person. I think is so important for trainee therapists and for all therapists to remember that a label is still a label. Even if it's a correct label, it is still a label. And I have seen a lot of like therapists that will not like diagnose, but like push a diagnosis. And it's important to be patient with clients as well. You know, that I think that's quite significant. Like people can still feel shame and shame around even a correct diagnosis. Like hypothetical, let's say they had BPD and now they think it's autism. They can still feel shame with that because of stigma associated with certain things. So go at the client's pace. That is being person-centred.
And it links into not judging them in that one scenario, in that one space that you've met them. It's also giving them time to explore.
Exactly. And, you know, and I don't mind things like, you know, resonating with clients because you've got neurodivergence as well. But it's that important, like I said, that my reality isn't the same as their reality. And it's just to be aware of that. Just because I was happy getting a diagnosis doesn't mean that a client will feel the same. So it's just like, just being wary of that.
And is there anything else that you haven't shared that you feel is really important that you would like to express?
I just feel like my journey is just like so true to like self-actualization that like I wasn't taken away, but like I'd left the environment, a bit like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, all my needs started to be met. And then I wouldn't say I'm self-actualized, but like I feel like I'm not far from the version of me that I would like to be. I feel I will never be self-actualized. It will always move and move and move as I grow. That's just my theory of it.
That gave me goosebumps.
Yeah, I just feel like it'll always get better. Well, I'm open to anyway. Like I will always make that version of me that I want to be bigger and better. But I feel like once them needs were met, it became a lot easier to work towards that. Almost like I wish there was like an opposite triangle to the hierarchy of needs. Like the downside of like, if they're not met, this is where it ends up.
Yeah, and that again then is more individualized compared to the models we currently use.
Yeah.
Now that you've told this part of your journey, how do you feel right now?
Well, I have told this part of my journey a few times. I am used to it. Yeah, I feel really good about it. I just feel like it's just a part that needs to be spoken about more. Like, a lot of people talk about being neurodivergent, a lot of people talk about having BPD, but not a lot of people talk about the two, especially from a therapist perspective. And I'm hoping it just decreases the stigma associated with all of it.
Yeah, and I, even as your friend, and I like to think that I know you very well, but even hearing you describe your journey for the second, third, fourth time, I think it will always be important.
Yeah, I think so.
So, Abbey, thank you for sharing that with us, and thanks for listening to the Person-Centred Conversations podcast. Please leave us a comment or a review of our episode on whichever platform you're watching and listening. For more person-centered conversations or to submit one of your own podcast episodes, please go to our website, www.personcenteredpractice.com.
Bye.